The morning fog settled thick over Street Farina Cemetery, like a shroud of memory and regret. Isabella Cortez stood at the iron gates, clutching white lilies against her black wool coat. 10 years. A full decade since she had watched them lower her father into the frozen December ground, since she had heard the bagpipes wail their mournful tune, since the folded flag had been pressed into her trembling 15-year-old hands. She could still remember the weight of that flag, how impossibly heavy it felt, as if all her father's hopes and dreams had been folded into that triangle of fabric. She walked the familiar path between headstones, her breath forming small clouds in the December air. The ground was hard beneath her boots, frost still clinging to the grass despite the pale sun trying to break through overhead. Icicles hung from the branches of bare oaks, glittering like crystal daggers. The cemetery was supposed to be empty at this hour. She had chosen dawn deliberately, wanting privacy for her grief, space to speak to her father without the pitying looks of strangers who couldn't possibly understand what she had lost. Every year the same ritual. White lilies, his favorite flower because they reminded him of purity and hope. A whispered conversation about the life she was building, the journalism career he would have been proud of, the corruption she was exposing in his name. Sometimes she told him about the cases she was working on, reading her articles aloud in the quiet morning air. Other times she simply sat in silence, remembering his laugh, the way he used to make terrible pancakes on Sunday mornings that were always burned on one side, how he would read her mystery novels and try to guess the ending before the final chapter. But as she rounded the corner toward her father's grave, past the angel monument that marked the Ferraro family plot, Isabella stopped dead. Her heart lurched into her throat. The lilies slipped from her fingers, tumbling to the damp grass, petals scattering like snow. 10 men stood in a perfect circle around Marco Cortez's headstone. All wore identical black suits, immaculately tailored, the kind that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Their hands were clasped behind their backs like soldiers at attention, like guards protecting something precious. The fog swirled around their legs, making them appear ghostly, almost unreal, like figures from a nightmare bleeding into the waking world. They stood so still they could have been statues, monuments to violence and power cast in human flesh. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought they might crack. Her journalist instincts warred with pure primal fear, the kind that made her ancestors climb trees to escape predators. She should run. She should call the police. She should do anything except stand here frozen like prey. Instead, she took a step backward, trying to retreat silently, and her foot caught on an exposed root. The sound of snapping wood cut through the morning silence like a gunshot echoing across the frozen landscape. One of the men turned. He was in his late 50s, silver-haired, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by an angry sculptor, high cheekbones, strong jaw, a nose that had been broken at least twice. His eyes were dark and calculating, the eyes of someone who had seen too much death, who had ordered it, who had delivered it personally when necessary. He wore his expensive suit like armor, every crease perfect, every line sharp. Power radiated from him like heat from a fire, visible and dangerous. Isabella recognized him instantly. Everyone in New York did. His face had been on the front page of every newspaper in the city at least once, though somehow he always avoided conviction. Lorenzo De Luca, the most feared name in organized crime on the East Coast. The man federal prosecutors had been trying to touch for 30 years, the ghost who walked freely through the streets while lesser men rotted in prison cells, taking the fall for crimes he orchestrated. The other 9 men parted silently, creating a path with military precision. Not one of them looked at Isabella. Their focus remained fixed on points around the cemetery, scanning for threats, watching the tree line, checking the gates. They were protecting their leader even in this place of the dead. Lorenzo walked toward the headstone with measured steps, each footfall deliberate, purposeful, as if this were sacred ground he dared not disturb. Then he knelt on the wet grass, heedless of his expensive suit that probably cost more than her car, and from his jacket pocket, he withdrew something small and metallic that caught the weak morning light. He placed it carefully on the stone, his movements gentle, reverent, the hands of a man who knew how to be tender despite a lifetime of violence. A police badge, old, tarnished with age and weather, with the number 847 engraved on its face. The morning light caught the metal, making it gleam briefly before the fog swallowed it again like the cemetery itself was reclaiming this piece of the past. Isabella's father's badge, the one that had been missing from his belongings, the one the department could never find despite searching for weeks. She had assumed it had been lost in the chaos of that terrible night, buried in an evidence locker somewhere, or stolen by the men who killed him as a trophy. She had filed requests for years, trying to recover it, wanting that tangible piece of her father back. Lorenzo's lips moved in what might have been a prayer. His head bowed, and for a moment, the most dangerous man in New York looked almost vulnerable, almost human. The fog seemed to respect his grief, pulling back slightly. Then he stood, brushing dirt from his knees with careful precision, the gesture oddly fastidious. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, but it carried through the fog like thunder, cutting through the silence with the weight of absolute authority and unmistakable sorrow. He saved my life. The words hung in the frozen air like an accusation. Isabella found her voice. It came out hoarse, shaking with anger and confusion and grief, all tangled together like barbed wire. You have no right to be here. This is sacred ground. You are not welcome. My father dedicated his life to putting people like you in prison. Lorenzo turned to face her fully. His expression was unreadable, the mask of a man who had spent decades hiding every emotion, every weakness, every crack in the armor. But something flickered in his eyes. Sadness? Regret? Pain? Miss Cortez, I knew you would come. He gestured to the grave with one hand, the movement elegant despite the gravity of the moment. I come every year on this day, to remember, to honor, to make sure he is not forgotten, that his sacrifice meant something. Honor? Isabella's voice rose, echoing off the nearby headstones, startling a murder of crows from a nearby tree. They took flight as one, their black wings loud against the silence. You are a criminal, a killer. My father dedicated his entire life to stopping people like you. He believed in justice, in the law, in doing what was right no matter the cost. And you dare to stand at his grave and talk about honor? You have no idea what that word even means. Lorenzo nodded slowly, accepting the accusation without flinching, without defending himself. Yes, he did. Your father was the most righteous man I ever knew. He had principles that he would not compromise. Not for money, not for power, not to save his own life. And yet, when he could have let me die, when he could have turned his back and watched justice be served through a bullet, he chose differently. He chose mercy. He chose to believe that even men like me deserve a second chance, that redemption is possible for anyone. He paused, and Isabella could see his throat work as he swallowed hard. Your father died protecting me. He took the bullet that was meant for my heart. He threw himself in front of me without hesitation. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her vision swimming, the cemetery tilting around her, as if the earth itself had shifted. One of Lorenzo's men stepped forward quickly, reaching out as if to steady her, but Lorenzo raised a hand sharply, stopping him with a gesture and a look. No, let her process this. She has earned the right to her anger, to her grief, to whatever she feels. We will not touch her. That's a lie, Isabella whispered, though even as she said it, she knew it was not. The pieces were clicking into place with horrible clarity. The gaps in the official story, the questions that had haunted her for a decade, the inconsistencies she had always felt but could never quite articulate. The report said he was killed during a warehouse raid. Gang violence. A tragic accident in the line of duty. That's what they told me at his funeral. That's what they told everyone who asked questions. That's what they told my mother before she died of grief 2 years later. The report was incomplete. Deliberately so. Lorenzo approached her slowly, his movements careful, non-threatening, like someone approaching a wounded animal that might bolt or attack. I have lived with this debt for 10 years. Every morning I wake up knowing I breathe because Marco Cortez does not. Every decision I make, I ask myself what he would think, whether he would approve, whether I am honoring his memory or defiling it. Every life I spare in his memory. But it is never enough. It will never be enough. There is no way to repay a debt like this. He reached into his coat. Isabella tensed, her hand moving instinctively toward the canister of pepper spray in her pocket, her muscles coiling to run. But Lorenzo only withdrew an envelope, thick and yellowed with age, the edges worn soft from handling. He held it out to her with both hands, an offering, a confession, a burden he had carried alone for too long. If you want the truth, it is here. Every detail, every name, every crime that led to that night. But I warn you, Miss Cortez, some truths are heavier than ignorance. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed. Some knowledge changes you forever. Isabella snatched the envelope from his hands, her own trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Lorenzo stepped back immediately, giving her space, his men closing ranks around him like a living shield, like the trained soldiers they probably once were. They moved as one, these silent guardians, their loyalty absolute and unquestioning. "When you are ready to know everything," Lorenzo said quietly, his voice carrying genuine sorrow that seemed to age him years and seconds, "you know where to find me. My door is always open to you." He paused at the edge of the path, turning back one final time, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Your father was a good man, Miss Cortez. The best I ever knew in a life filled with bad men. He saw something in me that no one else could see, something I am still not sure exists. His death will haunt me until I join him in the ground. Perhaps then, he will forgive me for surviving when he did not. I know you never will. I do not expect it. I do not deserve it." Then he was gone, melting into the fog with his entourage, disappearing like smoke on the wind. Isabella stood alone beside her father's grave, clutching the envelope to her chest like a lifeline, her world tilting on its axis, everything she thought she knew crumbling to dust. The white lilies lay forgotten on the grass, already wilting in the cold, their petals browning at the edges. Above her, the crows circled once and flew away toward the rising Sunday. Isabella's apartment was a shrine to her father, a museum to a man who had been larger than life. Photos lined every wall in carefully arranged frames she had hung herself over the years. His detective's shield hung in a shadow box above the fireplace, surrounded by commendations and letters of appreciation from families he had helped, from victims who had found justice because of his dedication. The bookshelf held his favorite mystery novels, their spines cracked and worn from repeated readings, margins full of his notes and theories. She had built her entire career as an investigative journalist around the foundation of his integrity, his unwavering belief that the truth mattered, that sunlight was the best disinfectant for corruption. Now she sat at her kitchen table as afternoon faded to evening, the envelope unopened before her like a coiled snake, a glass of whiskey untouched at her elbow growing warm. Outside, the city hummed with its evening rush, horns blaring in frustration, sirens wailing their urgent songs, the subway rumbling beneath the streets, life continuing as if nothing had changed, as if her entire understanding of reality had not just been shattered. Inside, the silence was suffocating, pressing down on her like a physical weight, making it hard to breathe. She had stared at the envelope for 3 hours, watching the shadows lengthen across her kitchen floor, watching the light change from afternoon gold to evening gray. The paper was old, the edges worn soft with handling. Someone had held this many times. Someone had agonized over whether to send it, whether to speak or remain silent. Finally, unable to bear the waiting any longer, unable to live one more second in ignorance, she tore it open with shaking hands that fumbled with the seal. Inside were photographs. Old ones, printed on the kind of thick photo paper they don't make anymore. The colors slightly faded with age, but still vibrant enough to punch her in the gut. The first showed her father in his patrol uniform, younger than she could remember ever seeing him, his face unlined by the stress she remembered from her teenage years. He stood beside a teenage boy with dark eyes and a defiant expression that barely masked fear. The boy's face was bruised, his lips split and swollen, dried blood crusting at the corner of his mouth. His eyes held rage and fear in equal measure, the look of a cornered animal ready to fight or flee. But her father's hand rested gently on his shoulder, and something in the boy's posture suggested he was holding back tears, holding back everything. Lorenzo De Luca, 20 years ago. Just a kid, scared, angry, alone, human. There were more photos, a timeline of connections she had never known existed. Her father and Lorenzo at a diner, sitting across from each other in a booth, plates of food between them. Lorenzo's posture relaxed in a way that suggested this was not their first meal together. Another showed them sitting in a patrol car, Lorenzo in the passenger seat reading a thick book while her father wrote in a notebook, probably filing reports. The boy looked peaceful, safe. The last photograph showed them shaking hands outside a courthouse, both dressed formally, Lorenzo in a suit that was too big for his thin frame, hanging off his shoulders like it belonged to someone else. Beneath the photos was a handwritten letter, multiple pages folded together. The paper was old, the ink slightly smudged in places as if water had fallen on it years ago. Tears, coffee, rain. Isabella recognized her father's handwriting immediately, The familiar loops and careful strokes she had spent hours studying as a child, trying to imitate the confident way he wrote. She had his last birthday card in a drawer upstairs, had memorized every word of love and pride. Seeing his handwriting now felt like seeing a ghost, like he was reaching through time to speak to her one final time. My dearest Isabella, if you are reading this, then Lorenzo has kept his promise to deliver it, and I am no longer here to explain myself, to defend my choices, to help you understand. I am writing this because I need you to understand a choice I made, one that may cost me everything I hold dear, but which I would make again in a heartbeat because it is the right thing to do, because some things matter more than safety. 20 years ago, I arrested a scared kid for stealing food from a corner store, bread and cheese wrapped in his jacket. Lorenzo De Luca was 15 years old, desperate, hungry, and heading down a dark path that I recognized all too well from my years on the force, from watching good kids make one bad choice that led to a lifetime of worse ones. Instead of processing him through the system, instead of adding another file to the mountain of juvenile arrests that would mark him forever, I bought him dinner at a diner near the precinct. We talked for hours. I saw something in him, Isabella. Potential, intelligence, a good heart buried under layers of survival instincts and justified anger at a world that had failed him from birth. I became his mentor, though I never told you or your mother because I knew you would worry, knew you would see the danger I was courting. For 5 years, I tried to guide him away from the life that was claiming so many young men in our neighborhood. I got him his GED after he dropped out of school. I helped him apply to colleges, wrote recommendation letters, believed he could escape. I showed him that there was another way, that his intelligence and determination could build something legitimate, something he could be proud of. But the streets are powerful, Isabella, and families like the De Lucas have long memories and longer reaches. His uncle was made, high up in the organization. The pressure on Lorenzo was immense. They wanted him back. They needed him. And ultimately, blood called to blood. Lorenzo was pulled back in despite my best efforts, despite everything I tried to do. He rose through the ranks quickly because he was smart and ruthless when he needed to be, when survival demanded it. But he never forgot those dinners, those conversations about philosophy and justice and whether people are born evil or made evil by circumstance. He carried a piece of me with him into that darkness. He tried to be better than the men around him. He had rules, lines he would not cross. It was not enough to make him good, but it made him different. It made him redeemable. 2 months ago, Lorenzo contacted me through channels I had established years ago, channels I maintained hoping he might one day use them. He had information about a war brewing between the families, a conflict that would spill onto the streets. Innocent people were going to die. Children, Isabella, women buying groceries, men walking home from work, people who had nothing to do with the life, who would just be collateral damage in someone else's war. He offered to help me stop it, knowing full well it would make him a target, that his own organization might turn on him for cooperating with law enforcement, that he was signing his own death warrant. We worked together in secret for weeks. The intelligence he provided saved lives, prevented massacres, stopped a war before it could begin. If you are reading this letter, then I have paid the price for that partnership. Know that I chose this path willingly. Know that I have no regrets. Some men can be redeemed, Isabella. Lorenzo De Luca is one of them, though he may never believe it himself, though he carries his sins like stones. He thinks he is beyond salvation. I think he is wrong. I think that boy I met 20 years ago is still in there somewhere, fighting to get out, trying to do right even when the world only sees his wrongs. Be kind to him, if you can find it in your heart, and be careful. The truth I uncovered goes deeper than one man, deeper than one corrupt cop. There are wolves in sheep's clothing within our own department. People I trusted, people I worked beside for years, who sat at our dinner table, who called themselves my friends. The rot goes all the way to the top. I have documented everything in these files, but I do not know if it will be enough. I am one man against a system, but I have to try. Your father always had to try, even when the odds were impossible. I love you more than words can express. Be brave, be strong, be the journalist I know you can be. Expose the truth, no matter the cost, no matter who it hurts. That's what Cortez women do. We fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Especially when it costs us everything. Your loving father, Marco. Isabella read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face, soaking the collar of her shirt, dripping onto the table and smudging the ink further. Everything she thought she knew was wrong. Her entire understanding of her father's death, of his life, of his values, of the night that changed everything had been built on incomplete information, on deliberate lies told to protect reputations and hide corruption. Her father had not died fighting criminals in some noble last stand. He had died protecting one, believing in redemption even at the cost of his own life. Her phone buzzed on the table, vibrating loudly against the wood. A text from Ethan Ward, her ex-boyfriend and current Interpol agent. They had dated briefly 2 years ago. A whirlwind romance that had burned bright and fast before reality set in. The job had gotten in the way. Too many missed dinners, too many canceled plans, too many nights alone. They had parted as friends, staying in touch, checking in occasionally, maintaining the connection even when the romance died. His message was short and worried. Heard you were asking about DeLuca through your contacts. Please tell me you are not doing anything stupid. That family is connected to every major criminal organization in the Northeast. They have people everywhere. Call me, please. I am worried about you. Isabella stared at the message, then at the photos spread across her table like cards in a fortune-teller's reading. Her father's face looked back at her from the past, young and hopeful beside a troubled teenager who would grow up to become one of the most feared criminals in America. A monster by any reasonable definition. A man who had ordered deaths, who had built an empire on violence and fear, whose name made strong men nervous. But could a monster visit a grave every year for a decade? Could a monster keep a promise to a dead man? Could a monster carry that kind of loyalty, that kind of honor, even if it was twisted and dark, even if it existed alongside terrible violence? She opened her laptop and began researching, her journalist instincts kicking into high gear, pushing past grief into the clarity of investigation. The official report on her father's death was sparse, sanitized, clearly designed to discourage follow-up questions. Officer Marco Cortez, killed in the line of duty during a raid on a suspected drug operation. No suspects apprehended. Case closed. Investigation concluded. Nothing to see here. Move along. But she knew how to dig deeper. Years as an investigative journalist had taught her to see the spaces between official statements, to recognize when a story had been sanitized, when powerful people wanted something buried, when the truth had been murdered along with the victims. She had sources in the department, contacts who owed her favors from previous stories, access to databases that most reporters never saw. She knew where the bodies were buried, metaphorically speaking, sometimes literally. By midnight, her apartment dark except for the glow of her laptop screen, empty coffee cups scattered across her desk, she had found inconsistencies that made her blood run cold. The raid had been organized by Detective Frank Rossi, her father's former partner, a man she had called Uncle Frank growing up, who had come to Sunday dinners and brought her presents on her birthday, who had helped her father build a treehouse in their backyard one summer when she was 7. But Rossi had retired 6 months after Marco's death, and moved to Florida with a pension that seemed far too generous for a man of his rank and years of service. His retirement home in Miami was worth $2 million, according to property records. His bank accounts showed regular deposits that did not match his salary, could not be explained by any legitimate source. Another name kept appearing in the margins of reports, in witness statements that were carefully worded to avoid direct accusations, in surveillance logs that had been partially redacted. Vincent Rossi, Frank's nephew, a known associate of the Rossi crime family, a man who had been arrested 14 times on charges ranging from racketeering to murder but never convicted, a ghost who walked free while better men rotted in cells, protected by connections and corrupted badges. Isabella's blood ran cold as the implications sank in, as the picture came into focus with horrible clarity. Her father's partner, the man who had organized the raid, had been connected to the very criminals they were supposed to be fighting. The man who had sat at their dinner table and smiled while planning betrayal. The man who had comforted her at her father's funeral, holding her while she cried, probably counting his blood money in his head even then. She grabbed her coat and keys, her decision made, her path clear. If she wanted answers, if she wanted to understand what really happened that night 10 years ago, there was only one person who could give them to her. Only one person who had been there, who had seen everything, who had held her father as he died. She was going to see Lorenzo DeLuca, and he was going to tell her the truth, all of it, every terrible detail, no matter what it cost either of them. The story Isabella wrote changed everything. The article went live at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday, time to catch the morning news cycle. By 7, her phone was exploding with calls from editors at major publications wanting follow-ups, from lawyers representing everyone from the NYPD to the Rossi family threatening lawsuits, from federal law enforcement congratulating her on the most significant corruption expose in decades. By 8, her face was on every news channel in the country, pundits debating the implications, former prosecutors calling for immediate investigations. She had not held back. Every bank record Lorenzo had provided. Every recording of Frank Rossi talking to Vincent Rossi about protecting family operations. Every piece of evidence showing the web of corruption that stretched through the NYPD like cancer. Frank Rossi's name was destroyed within hours. The NYPD was in chaos, with the commissioner calling for an immediate internal investigation. Federal investigators were already moving, warrants being issued, arrests planned. It was everything her father would have wanted: justice, truth, accountability. But Isabella had also told another story within the story. A human story that made editors nervous and lawyers sweat. The story of a young man who made terrible choices, who built an empire on violence because that was the only world he knew, but who had been given a chance by a good cop who believed in second chances. Who had tried, in his own broken way, to honor that chance. She had not painted Lorenzo as a hero. Heroes did not order executions. Heroes did not run criminal enterprises. But she had painted him as human, complicated, capable of loyalty and honor even within a world of betrayal. Ethan arrived at her apartment at noon, his face grim, his eyes worried. "Isabella, what have you done?" He dropped a newspaper on her table, her byline above the fold. "You just declared war. The Rossi family is not going to let this stand. They have killed people for less. You just put a target on your back the size of Manhattan. I exposed the truth. That's my job. That's what my father would have wanted. That's what he died for. Your job is going to get you killed." Ethan grabbed her shoulders, his grip tight with desperation. "Pack a bag right now. Interpol can put you in protective custody until we round up the key players. Witness protection if necessary. A new identity, a new life. You cannot stay here. I am not running. I am not hiding. If I run now, everything my father died for means nothing. Then you are being stupid, and I do not know how to help you." His eyes were fierce, desperate. "I know you think DeLuca will protect you, but he is just as dangerous as the Rosses. Maybe more so. He is a criminal, Isabella. He has killed people. Do not trust him." Before Isabella could respond, before she could explain, her windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and wood. Glass sprayed across the room, glittering in the afternoon light like deadly snow. Ethan shoved her to the floor hard, his body covering hers as gunfire erupted from the street below. The sound was deafening, bullets punching through walls, shattering dishes, destroying her father's photographs. The attack lasted 30 seconds, but it felt like hours. When the shooting stopped, Isabella's ears were ringing, her heart racing so fast she thought it might explode. Ethan was already on his phone, calling for backup, his service weapon drawn and ready, his training taking over. Then another sound cut through the ringing. Squealing tires. More gunfire, but different. Controlled. Professional. Shouting in Italian. Return fire. Ethan moved to the broken window, staying low, glass crunching under his shoes. His face went pale. "There are 2 SUVs down there. Black. Armored. They are engaging the shooters. Professional tactics. Military movements. This is not police." Isabella crawled to the window, her hands cut and bleeding from glass. In the street below, Lorenzo's men had arrived like guardian angels dressed in black. They moved with military precision, weapons drawn, returning fire with controlled bursts, creating a protective perimeter around her building with their bodies and their vehicles. They were outnumbered but better trained, better equipped, more disciplined. The Rossi family's gunmen retreated quickly when they realized what they were facing. One of Lorenzo's men took a bullet to the shoulder but kept fighting, barely flinching, covering his brothers until the threat was neutralized. Within 2 minutes it was over. The attackers were dead or fled. The street was suddenly quiet except for car alarms and distant sirens. Ethan stared at the scene, his jaw tight with realization and grudging respect. DeLuca's protection. He really meant it. This is not just watching from a distance. This is active protection. Military grade. Isabella's phone buzzed. A text from Lorenzo, terse and commanding. "My men are outside. They will take you somewhere safe. Do not argue. This is not a request. It is a promise I made to your father. Trust me." Ethan read over her shoulder, his face darkening. "Isabella, listen to me. If you go with them, Interpol cannot help you. You will be in DeLuca's world. His rules. His protection means his control. You will owe him. You will be his." She looked at the shattered glass, at the bullet holes in her walls, at the destroyed shrine to her father, then at Ethan's worried face, at the genuine fear in his eyes. "My father trusted him with his life. Literally. That has to mean something. That has to count for something. Your father is dead because of him, because he existed, because he was in that warehouse. No, my father is dead because he chose to save him, because he believed people could change. There is a difference. Intent matters. Choice matters." She grabbed her laptop and the folder of evidence, the only things that mattered now. As she moved toward the door, stepping over broken glass and splintered furniture, Ethan caught her arm one final time. His grip was gentle but firm. "When this goes wrong," he said, his voice tight with emotion and acceptance, "call me. I will come for you. No matter what, no matter where. I will find you, and I will bring you home. I promise." Isabella squeezed his hand briefly, feeling the warmth, remembering why she had loved him once. Then she walked out, down the stairs, and into the waiting arms of Lorenzo DeLuca's protection. The war had begun, and she was right in the center of it, the eye of a hurricane that would destroy everything in its path. 1 year later, Isabella Cortez stood in Street Verena Cemetery again on another cold December morning. But this time, the morning was clear and bright, the sun burning away the last traces of winter cold with the promise of spring to come. The fog had lifted, the shadows had receded. Everything was different now. Frank Rossi was in federal prison, awaiting trial on 17 counts including conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and corruption. The evidence was overwhelming. He would die in prison. The Rossi crime family had fractured, torn apart by arrests and infighting, different factions turning on each other when the protection of corrupted badges disappeared. The NYPD had undergone massive reforms, entire divisions investigated and restructured. And Isabella had won a National Journalism Award for her investigation, though the trophy sat in a box in her closet. It felt wrong to celebrate. Lorenzo DeLuca had disappeared. Some said he was dead, killed in the violence that had followed her expose, caught in the crossfire of warring families. Others said he had retired, made a deal with federal prosecutors in exchange for testimony, left the country, finally free of the life that had defined him since he was 15 years old. Isabella did not know which story was true. Part of her did not want to know. Some mysteries were better left unsolved. She knelt beside her father's grave and placed white lilies on the stone, the petals perfect and white against the dark granite. Next to them she set something else. A small photograph, creased and old, edges worn soft from handling. Her father and a teenage Lorenzo, smiling outside a diner, hope visible in both their faces. She had carried it with her for a year, looking at it when doubt crept in, when she questioned everything. "You believed people could change, Dad," she whispered, her voice steady now, healed by time and truth. "You saw goodness where others saw only darkness. You gave second chances when the world demanded punishment. And you were right. You were always right. Even when it cost you everything. Even when it cost me you." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of spring blossoms from somewhere beyond the cemetery walls. Somewhere in the distance a church bell rang, marking the hour. Above her, birds sang their morning songs, indifferent to human grief and human hope. Life continuing, always continuing. Isabella stood, brushing dirt from her knees, the gesture unconsciously mirroring Lorenzo's from a year ago. As she walked back down the path, past the angel monument, past the rows of silent dead, she noticed someone standing by the cemetery gate. A silver-haired man in a simple black coat, his face weathered but peaceful, his posture relaxed in a way she had never seen before. He looked lighter somehow, free. Their eyes met across the distance. Lorenzo nodded once, slowly, a gesture of respect and goodbye and gratitude. Then he turned and walked away, melting into the morning crowd on the sidewalk, just another face in the city, anonymous and unremarkable. Isabella smiled through tears that were not quite sad anymore. Some debts, she understood now, were never fully repaid in any traditional sense. They were carried forward, transformed from burdens into something else entirely, into honor, into memory. into purpose, into the quiet determination to be better than we were yesterday, to make choices that mattered, to believe in second chances even when the world demanded vengeance. Her father had saved Lorenzo De Luca's life. Lorenzo had saved hers. And she had saved the truth, exposing corruption and ensuring justice finally prevailed. Perhaps that was enough. Perhaps that was more than enough. Perhaps that was everything that mattered in the end. The debt had been paid in full, not in blood or money, but in choices made and truths told. In a cemetery in Brooklyn, under a December sky finally clear of fog, 3 souls had found peace. One resting in the ground, one walking free toward an uncertain future, and one moving forward, carrying their legacy into the light.